The Rebel Capitalist Show.
You talked about government digital currency or cryptocurrency, whatever you want to call it. And I know you've got some strong opinions on that. You've done some research. So that's a hot topic for sure with my audience. Let's dive into that and try to unpack.
So I'm bound to make friends now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the facts, right? Which we think are facts. The facts are that out of the large countries, let's just ignore tiny countries right now. But if we're talking about the kind of G7 plus China in terms of the size, then the Chinese government is much further ahead than anyone else. They're already in trials of some form of central bank currency, and they're using Alibaba, Tencent, who own the payment rails in China along with the major banks. This is already being rolled out at a small scale, but it's happening. And we know that people like Mark Carney, just as he left his famous Jackson Hole speech that didn't go down so well in the US, was talking about how the rest of the world's not so happy about the US hegemony. And there's a good reason for why central banks, so most notably UK, Australia, we know the Fed's looking at it, but everyone's looking at this. At the end of the day, this is linked, of course, to reserve currency of the world, the reserve assets of the world. But central banks, there's one thing governments seem to be pretty agreeing on right now, is they want to get rid of cash, and COVID's a fantastic opportunity. And in Asia, it was very organic. I live in Hong Kong, and just without the government saying anything, people were like, we don't want your cash. It could be dirty. So literally, and this happened all across Asia first. I don't know if it's a phenomenon happening elsewhere. But the government didn't do anything to encourage this. It just happened. And it's exactly what a government would like, because the less cash used, the more they can track. And when you and I both have a central bank account, which we will have one day, then by definition, and if cash is in effect not used, they can track everything we do. And this is getting very 1984. But then I think it's someone like Richard Werner that goes down an interesting path now, which is he's really got some fair points, which is central banks ultimately are either the regulator or one of the regulators that regulate the major banks in each country. Some countries have very complex regulatory regimes. But just take the US. The Fed is quite obviously a major regulator of banks, and they're going to give all of us, and not just us as individuals, but every corporate, every company, a Fed account. They're going to start competing against the banks that they regulate. And I don't see why politicians right now are going to have an issue with that, when they just think they're going to get more control. And ultimately, though, if this does get very 1984, there's only one way it gets solved, which is at the ballot box. If these generations never care, then I suspect governments will be able to get away with any amount of data collection for generations.
How does Bitcoin play into that? Does Bitcoin kind of allow us to check out of the system, or do you think they're going to ban it and it's going to become like heroin, where you might be able to use it, but the downside, as far as a prison term, is so great that people will just avoid using it? Or how do you think that plays out?
Well, first of all, I'm biased because I've owned Bitcoin for 6 or 7 years, and I don't trade it. I just let it sit there and just don't care. So I'm biased. And again, I think when people disclose their biases, it's always helpful. Now, I also try and be realistic on this. So I do not think Bitcoin is going to be like some magical world reserve currency, replacing the US dollar for actual FX transactions. There's technical reasons why right now it couldn't even do it, but let's assume, we've got to remember, it's just software, right? So, if we think back to early versions of, Microsoft Windows, well, they didn't do much, and now Windows does a lot more. So a lot of people forget that it can evolve in terms of functionality. And there are thousands of people who are very, very smart working on it. But it's in terms of, it's popular for people to say, well, yes, the government's just going to come and ban it. Yeah, maybe. Again, if the younger generations who have vastly higher ownership of digital assets than older generations are voting more and more and more, ultimately, again, it gets decided at the ballot box. If 20, 30-year-olds do not want this banned, why on earth would a government ban it? They're going to get chucked out. So I think as once you go through the whole Fed or Bank of England or whatever you want to call it coin, people see that there's more big brotherness happening.
Right.
Whether people really understand what's all going on, I wouldn't be surprised if people do gravitate towards something that's outside of the main system. And people have done this for a long time with gold. It's I mean, let's not get into silver, palladium, all the other stuff, but if you just take gold, it used to be part of the system and then it kind of wasn't. Could argue we've had a 50-year experiment, that might get laughed at in the future. So I think alternatives are good. It does have one phenomenal property, which is, again, one can argue what it's worth all day, and you could argue what an ounce of gold is worth all day. But at the end of the day, I think it will become the most kind of pristine collateral that you can have in the world, because it's instantly transferable. You cannot pledge it twice. You can wrap a contract around it, software that means if it's pledged as collateral in one place, it's not possible to pledge it elsewhere, which is absolutely not the case right now. It's called rehypothecation of collateral. It happens all the time in the world.
Yep.
And in Asia, it's super bad, by the way. So it's not uncommon for someone to pledge a collateral 5-10 times.
So you can't rehypothecate it, and it's a fixed supply. You got 21 million, right. And also, and it sounds crazy, or it sounds kind of funny to say it, but that's it's a decreasing supply because people just lose them.
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, on the rehypothecation, so to be clear, if you just say to someone, I have some Bitcoin, well, of course you could tell 28 other people you have some Bitcoin. But if you actually put it in a software contract it's called a smart contract, and this can be done. This is where Ethereum comes into it, by the way. You can wrap the Bitcoin with the contract, and actually both sides can audit the software. And it can be open source, and it can absolutely be used as nice collateral. And so there's 21 million. Now, no one knows how many's already been lost, but most estimates are of the order of 2, 3, or 4 million is probably never coming back.
And there's always going to be more and more and more lost.
Correct. It's possible to unlock. You can find a key, but it's fairly unlikely. But it is possible. You could find a piece of paper, or you could find a digital file or whatever that has something. But so they're probably going to end up being about 17 million that actually circulate. And the ultimate issue with gold is that there is a pseudo infinite amount in the universe. Now, it doesn't mean we can access it, and we might not be able to access it for decades or hundreds of years. But even in our solar system, there's much more than, in fact, just in the Earth, there's a huge amount more than we've mined. With Bitcoin, it literally is that amount, and it's not going to go more. Now, people say, oh, that could just change. But to change that number would need every constituent part of the Bitcoin ecosystem to economically screw themselves, which is just not going to happen. So I feel much more comfortable that won't change versus, if a government was in charge, of course, they'll change it tomorrow. But look, there are people like Raoul who's, as he's called it, being irresponsibly long Bitcoin, and it's by far his largest position. He has said, roughly where it is, and he's literally above 50%.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And it's actually more, but again, I'm not recommending that's a position everyone should have. But he's looked into it a lot, and thinks it's the best macro trade right now. There are plenty of people that would put gold in that bucket too, right? A lot of people long gold, which is what gives me pause in some ways, because everyone's long it. So, but if Bitcoin is the world's most pristine collateral, because you can move it easily. You can't move gold bars easily. It doesn't matter what anyone says. Yes, there are ways it becomes accounting entries again. And you can move Bitcoin. You can use software. It's in a way that allows you to protect that collateral. Younger generations get it. They've always understood the value of digital stuff in a way that older generations haven't. And it's got the network effect as of now. That doesn't mean it will in 10 years. but also the Lindy effect, I think, is important. It's been around, 11 or 12 years now. Bitcoin is meant to have died about 5,000 times already. And there's a website that tracks this. But again, like if it's one of those big rabbit holes that when you really get into it, you tend to realize that everything hasn't been worked out yet, but there are people working on these things, and these are smart people. And at the end of the day, you can change code. And when everyone in the system's working to better the system, it'd be very odd if people are doing things to make it worse. Again, just getting your mind around what decentralization really means is a very interesting topic for most people because they're not used to it. So.